This video lesson, then we consider a bit more detail the different possibilities to organize the international monetary systems. So this diagram illustrates the policy trilemma for open economies. So we have seen similar kind of trilemma a little bit before in the introductory lesson, but here similarly we have three desirable properties of the monetary system that policymakers potentially might want to have, and those are on the edges of the triangle. So, for example, it would be desirable to have a relatively stable exchange rates, so that's on the top of the triangle. Then the central bank should have monetary policy autonomy, or it would be desirable if it has. And thirdly, it would be desirable that there would be relatively free financial flows. So companies, for example, and banks can exchange currencies as they want. Unfortunately, all these three cannot be satisfied simultaneously. So in the end, then the policymakers need to choose between policymakers can choose two of the three desirable properties. So I mentioned in the previous video lesson this Bretton Woods system that emerged after the Second World War. So that was based on the fixed exchange rates. So during that time, then the policymakers chose this combination of exchange rate stability and freedom of financial flows, and that could be achieved by having fixed exchange rates. However, by doing so, then at least a part of monetary policy autonomy would be surrendered to the U.S. Federal Reserve. Another possibility, if then countries want to have monetary policy autonomy and still maintain stable exchange rates, then it is possible to, or it is necessary then to set up some financial controls, so essentially limit the current currency exchange transactions in certain way. And finally, if the policymakers want to have free financial flows, so the freely exchangeable currency and still monetary policy autonomy, then the choice is to allow exchange rates to freely float in the forex markets. So for many economists, this floating exchange rate regime that maintains monetary policy autonomy and freedom of financial flows is the choice or the recommended choice. Of course, the downside is that then the exchange rates are not necessarily stable. So sometimes the currency can appreciate or depreciate quite considerably. And that, of course, creates some kind of risks for example, for exporting and importing firms. So this kind of unstable exchange rate can be a factor of risk, but then there's certain advantages as well. So the main advantages of the floating exchange regimes that many governments have nowadays adopted are the following. So in the floating exchange rate regime, then central banks have no necessity to interfere in the currency exchange markets to defend any fixed exchange rates. And then the governments can use monetary policy to reach internal and external balance. And also that means that the inflation or deflation is not imported from other countries. Another advantage is that unlike in this kind of Bretton Woods type agreement, that the USA or whatever other country is not able to set the monetary conditions by itself. So then this kind of dominant position, at least to some extent, disappears from the US Federal Reserve. Perhaps one of the most important advantages of the floating exchange rates is that then this this market-determined exchange rates help the national economies to maintain internal and external balance when there are changes in the aggregate demand. So there is not this kind of speculative attacks on the currency, and also then emergence of very large current account deficits or surpluses is kind of automatically avoided. So I have taken the following diagram to illustrate this floating exchange rate as an automatic stabilizer. So this figure is from the Krugman et al. Textbook, and the textbook has actually a lot of similar kind of figures that I don't go through in detail, but I explain here how this kind of equilibrium is reached both in the commodity markets and in the money markets. So firstly, let's start with this kind of upward sloping DD schedules in this diagram. So notice in the diagram that there is output Y is on the horizontal axis, and the exchange rate E that we are also interested in is on the vertical axis. And the DD schedule, so these upward sloping red lines, they indicate all combinations of output and exchange rate for which the output market is in the short-run equilibrium. So in the output market, aggregate demand equals aggregate output. So these are this kind of equilibrium states. But then we have also the domestic money market and the foreign exchange markets. So this AA schedules, the downward sloping blue line, then indicates the potential exchange rate and output combinations that are consistent with this kind of money market equilibrium. So in the general equilibrium, then both this DD schedule and AA schedule should hold. So let's suppose that initially we are in this kind of general equilibrium in point 1, where both the economy is both on this DD schedule and AA schedule. So in other words, the output market is in the equilibrium, and also the domestic money market and foreign exchange markets are in the equilibrium. So suppose that then there is some kind of demand shock. So for example, then this DD schedule then moves upwards or to the left. So for example, there's export demand increases. So then if there's floating exchange rates, then this economy tends to then move from equilibrium 1 to equilibrium number 2. So then the currency exchange rate appreciates, and then there's a little bit less output Y2. So there's sorry, I should say that there is a decrease in the demand when this DD schedule moves to the left. So in the new equilibrium, then there's aggregate output decreases from Y1 to Y2, and the currency exchange rate appreciates to keep also the exchange market in the equilibrium. So when the currency this appreciation, of course, then decreases the export demand for the good. So the main point here is that then the central bank doesn't need to make some kind of exchange operations in the foreign exchange market or support some kind of fixed exchange rate, but then this kind of floating exchange rate regime then automatically stabilizes also this current account. So there can be, however, some kind of delayed effect if, for example, currency appreciates or depreciates. So in this case, we think about currency depreciation and how it affects the current account balance. So here in this diagram, notice that the horizontal axis represents time, and vertical axis is then the current account balance. So suppose that we are initially in point number one, and then the currency then depreciates. And initially, it can be that I mentioned earlier in the lesson that in the previous lesson that when the currency currency exchange rate depreciates, so then there is increase in the export demand and decrease in the import demand. However, typically, of course, this kind of export and import transactions have been already agreed beforehand. So this kind of exports and imports don't react immediately. So the instantaneous reaction to the current account can be that actually current account decreases, because when the currency depreciates, then these imports become more expensive and exports bring less revenue. So the instantaneous effect can be actually that current account gets to a deficit, or surplus decreases. So the current account decreases. But since when this both import demand and export demand then adjust to the new situation, and then this kind of forces that I mentioned earlier, that imports become more expensive, so import demand tends to decrease, and similarly exports become less expensive for foreign customers, so exports tend to increase. Then over time, then we move along this kind of red path indicated in this diagram. So in the longer run, then eventually the current account then increases rather than decrease. So there can be, because of this kind of existing contracts, there can be and kind of short term that if these kind of contracts are fixed in the short term, then there can be decrease in the current account. But then there's tendency that in the longer term, when there's new contracts and new both import and export demand will adjust for the new exchange rate, then this current account tends to increase. So this kind of time pattern is referred to as the J curve. So that there is initially this kind of downward move in the current account from point number one to point number two, but then as time goes on, then this current account then returns back to its previous level and beyond. So this kind of time path remains like this letter J. So this is why it's referred to as the J curve. So in the next video lesson, then I will discuss how the exchange rates depend also from the interest rates and the central bank's decisions. See you then.